Welcome to the Idea to Value podcast, where in every episode we highlight the latest insights into creativity and innovation from experts around the world. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn. I care about the evidence behind what makes ideas happen, and I've already helped thousands of people just like you through my unique insights into recent scientific findings of how creativity works. I also show you how to turbocharge innovation programs so they finally deliver on the value and ideas you've been struggling to execute. Get your free training on how creativity can be improved by registering now at www.ideatovalue.com. Now let's get on with today's episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Idea to Value podcast with me, your host, Nick Skillicorn. And we've got a very special guest today, Mr. David Burkus, one of the world of innovation's big players, and also the author of The Myths of Creativity and his new book, Under New Management. Welcome, David.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. And thank you. You make me sound way cooler than I really am with World of Innovation's big players. You and I have a similar passion, right? Where there's a need for more voices in this space, and every single one of them raises the volume, and we need more until everybody can hear us.
Absolutely. So, David, why don't you just give our audience a quick introduction into who you are and how you got into this work around creativity and innovation?
Okay, yeah. So I am I'm an academic by training, but it's fairly accidental, right? So I, growing up, always sort of was interested in creativity from the aspect of literature and writing. I went to university as an undergraduate to study English, actually, and writing. And then in there, I kind of fell in love through electives with social science, organizational psychology in particular. And so that's what I went on to study in graduate school for, really with the goal of being a translator, of being somebody who could understand how to read a scientific study and then also understand how to tell it in a story so that people could figure out how to apply it. Or as I like to kind of say now, I like to take evidence-based ideas, put handles on them, and turn them into tools so people can use them far more easily. And so that led to a bunch of different things. Interestingly enough, it led to an offer to come interview about a professor position, which is the perfect day job when you're moonlighting as an innovation advocate and an evidence-based leadership advocate, right? So, but again, the big goal was to always be that translator, to put handles on good ideas, make it easier for leaders and for everybody to use them.
I know. I that's why I feel a bit of affinity towards your work, as what I do is so similar as well. There's so much good evidence out there about how you can improve performance, but it's unfortunately written in such a way that most people, it's like reading Latin to them. So they need someone like you or me to figure out what to actually do with this information.
Yeah, and I mean, that's not to say that people can't figure it out. It's just, we respond to incentives. Academics are incentivized to speak to other academics, and individuals who are sort of in the muck and the mire trying to innovate are incentivized to solve problems. So unless you can make it really easy how this solves their problem right away, which is usually not what an academic is writing up, they're just writing look at this awesome discovery, and not really writing about here's what it means for practice, right? So again, yeah, that's where you and I and lots of other folks come in, is trying to, the other analogy I like to use is trying to tear down the wall between the ivory tower and the corner office, right?
Yeah. So the book that kind of put you on the map for a lot of people is The Myths of Creativity. And for the people who haven't read it, I strongly recommend you get a copy. But David, why don't you give us a bit of an insight into some of the actionable insights you found from there that our listeners might be able to actually take away and do something with?
Yeah, so I mean, the fundamental premise of The Myths of Creativity, which is interesting because true to writing any long form project, you don't actually realize it till it's over. And so this line is nowhere in the book. But the fundamental premise is that the stories that we tell ourselves are true even when they're not true. So even if the story is totally false and it's all in your head, if you say it again and again and again, you end up believing it, right? And so in the myths of creativity, myths are stories we use to try and understand the world around us. And the realm of creativity and innovation is no different. There's all sorts of stories about where great ideas come from, or about who has access to creativity, or what it's supposed to look like, et cetera, that are just not true. They're stories we tell ourselves, usually either to make us feel, if we're already doing creative work, to make us feel like we're special, or if we're not doing creative work, to make us feel like, well, we're off the hook. We didn't get blessed by the gods, therefore it's not our responsibility. So, I mean, the first big applicable tip is that do an audit of the stories that you're telling yourself, because the research supports the idea that everyone has the potential to increase their creativity no matter where you start. It's more a practice than it is a raw cognitive ability, and getting in practice of that by just actually trying to come up with ideas more often, like having a daily practice where you're coming up with ideas, or just understanding where you are in the innovation process is a huge deal for growing your creative potential.
I think that's one of the most fundamental things that I teach people as well, because as you say, a lot of people feel like they're off the hook and they don't need to be creative because they don't feel like they're good singers or good dancers or good painters, and therefore they're not stereotypically creative. Whereas in reality, as you say, the evidence shows that everyone has the ability to be creative and improve it as well. So I quite often talk to people about it like in a similar way to exercise. Some people who may be slightly overweight, they blame their genetics, or they blame their upbringing, or they blame society for the fact that they haven't lost weight. Whereas in reality, everyone has the ability to improve their health and improve their exercise. You just need to accept it and do something about it.
No, exactly. And you know, even in business, we sort of silo out into different divisions in a business, and we do the same thing, right? So marketing, R&D, to some extent, the players in strategy, they're all talking about being creative and innovative. Finance and accounting, no, we don't want any creative accounting, which, all right, they might have a point about that. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that we don't need new insights and new perspectives on how to run the business, the totality of the business, not just how to run the marketing arm.
Absolutely. So when you go beyond this idea of just having ideas, one of the other things that my listeners and everyone I talk to in the realm of innovation specifically thinks is very important is, how do we start doing things with these ideas? How do we not only get it as part of our day-to-day habits, but how do we get the time and the permission to start executing ideas? And I think this feeds into your second book, which is called Under New Management, which is, from my perspective, a lot more focused on the implementation and working practices side of getting ideas out there and actually into reality. So why don't you tell us a bit about what you found from the research you put into your newest book?
Yeah, so Under New Management was really an attempt to solve, you know, in writing The Myths of Creativity, you can't write a book about creativity and innovation and not come across 3M's 15% time, Google's 20% time, or Dan Pink talked about FedEx days in Drive. You can't come across those ideas. And that really made me wonder, okay, what else is out there? What else are companies doing to structure their management practices, their people practices to be more innovative, or at least to respond to the call for more and more creative work in business? And so that's really where Under New Management came from. That, as it pertains to creativity, there's 13 different practices. Lucky number 13. I have no idea why we ended up that way. It just happened. But there's 13 practices, and they all actually stem from two essential ideas. So in a leadership role, all of these practices were inspired either by the need to demonstrate trust to employees. In other words, we trust your abilities. We trust that you're going to do what's in your interest and our interest, and we're going to help you do it. And then trust, and then also elimination. In other words, we saw that there was a practice or a policy that was blocking you from doing your best work. And so we decided to scrap it. We decided to get rid of it, maybe replace it with something else, but in most cases just say, forget about it, because it's blocking you from doing your best work. So from a leadership standpoint, those are kind of the two biggest ones. Now, the downside is that's not necessarily good news if you're not in the leadership role, right? Because if you're not trusted, and if they're constantly blocking your way, then really the first question you have to ask is, maybe I should share my talents with the competition. But if you're dead set on sticking with that company, then there are still ways that you can leverage earned trust. So you're doing what you are asked to do, and then gradually you're asking for more and more time. And or, as I like to tell a lot of people, 20% time is great, but in reality, no employer can tell you what to do with the other 128 hours in your week, right? They're contracted you for 40 or 50 hours, salary might be more hours, et cetera. But beyond that, they can't tell you what to do. And what's funny is, even when you look at big innovations like the Post-it note, for example, and 3M's 15% time, that project was actually scrapped, and they used nights and weekends to keep working on it to bring it back into the fold. So no one can tell you to do on your own time. Maybe especially if you're sold out on staying inside that organization, this has got to be a side project or a side hustle until it's ready for prime time to present to people.
So taking that a step further, let's talk about some sort of actionable insights. Can I get two sort of tactics you found from your research into your new book? One from the sort of lower level employee who just wants to improve their productivity and performance, and one from the company leader who wants to actually improve performance across their entire company.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of actionable, for the employee, ironically, this is a thread in both books, sort of. But I think you need to take a deep look at how you are communicating, in particular email, right? So most of us default to whatever the IT department set up or whatever came with our computer, which means push notifications. Every 5 minutes, there's a new email in our inbox. And it's distracting, and it's blocking you from doing your best work, right? As Cal Newport would call it, your deep work. But you need largely big blocks of time that are relatively unstructured so you can focus in on doing that creative work. At the same time, there's still you can't just ignore email. It'd be awesome if you could. But at the same time, the research supports this idea of really understanding and doing creative work is a matter of understanding when you need to be deeply focused and when you need to be incubating, or when you need to kind of scale back on it. So, a lot of people say they get their best ideas in the shower. That's a great incubation time. I've found that most email is a great incubation time, right? Because let's be honest, most of it does not require higher levels of thought. It requires, yes, 2:30 sounds great, or no, I can't be at that meeting, etc., or just responding to calendar invites. Now, there are obviously some emails you get that require you to think deeply, etc., but most of it is like junk. It's the junk food of business work, right? So I actually use it a lot of times for incubation. So not only am I getting a handle on when I'm receiving those messages, I'm using them at a time where I know I need to take a break from the deep work and do something lighter to kind of give my brain a relaxation, right? So that's for the individual. For the leader, again, I think the biggest exercise and the biggest actionable tip you can do is get around and start interacting with your people and listen to their pain points, listen to their frustrations. It's your job as the leader to sort of set them free, not totally free, not like fire them, but to find the things that are blocking them from doing work and find a way to do it. In some organizations, especially if you feel like your company is not the most creative as a whole, sometimes that involves being a little human shield for your people so that you can block them from all of this stuff. And in other times, it means advocating for change. But it all starts the same way. It all starts with listening for those pain points.
I mean, that's really excellent insight, because a lot of times people at the top, they feel like the only reason they're there is to choose what to say no to. And quite often when it comes to innovation and taking the business forward instead of just keeping it where it is, it's just as important, if not more important, to learn what you're allowed to say yes to. And of course, there's a fine balance, but you need to be an enabler, not just a manager.
Right, exactly. And, it is one of the realities of senior level management, especially, is that resources are finite. You can't fund every single employee's pet project, right? So you do have to decide which ones. Towards that end, I'll give you another sort of actionable tip. What I train and teach a lot of executives to say is, rather than a yes or no, when that employee is presenting the idea, the very first response is usually something to the effect of, interesting. What would have to be true for this idea to work? Right? In other words, I'm not saying yes or no. I'm saying, okay, let's you and I start deciding how we can judge the merits of this idea. So at the very least, if down the road we end up killing it, you felt heard. What would have to be true for this idea to work? And then let's go find out if those things are true. If they're not, we're going to kill the idea, but you had a part in that. If they are, then I've got a much better case to make to whoever I need to go fight for resources with.
That's excellent insights, and I think a lot of people can really relate to that. Now, David, we're coming up to the end of it, but just getting back to you individually, you've obviously written quite a bit. You're active presenting TED Talks, producing videos. You've got a podcast as well. What's it called again?
The podcast is called Radio Free Leader. It's a bit of a play on words, right? So it's a podcast, so it's radio free, but also, I made the joke earlier about tearing down the wall between the ivory tower and the corner office. There really is a wall or an iron curtain between these two things, and we're trying to tear them down.
And it's a really excellent podcast. I recommend everyone have a listen to it and subscribe to it if you like it. But how do you approach your creative work yourself? What is your creative process, and how do you allocate your time between your various projects?
So, in true sort of Thomas Edison form, even though a lot of what he said is largely mythological, I try and really divide between ideation and execution, right? So there is probably only about 15 to 20 minutes in a day where I'm thinking about new ideas. The rest of the time is sort of executing it. And so especially when it comes to writing, I actually borrowed a strategy from a friend of mine, probably a more skilled writer than I am, Jeff Goins, who talks about, he calls it a 3-bucket strategy. But essentially the way that it works is there are different times and different places where your ideas go and where you catch ideas, and then where you pull ideas from and execute, and that's at a different time. And then where you take the execution and you edit it, and that's at a different time. So my biggest approach is really scheduling that out. So in my most days, the first thing that I'm doing, actually right now I'm in the midst of writing book 3. So the first thing that I do is try and crank out words, the execution phase. And then usually I'll go in to a little bit of editing, hopefully something that's been written about a week ago so I can see it with fresh eyes. And then in the afternoon, that's really when I'm kind of on calls, but also consuming other content. And that's where kind of the ideation time comes in. And I have a way of capturing those ideas. It depends on what medium I'm in of capturing them. And then we start again, right? New day, new start.
Perfect. David, where can my listeners get some more information from you?
So the absolute best place to find me is davidburkus.com. That's where info about the books are. That's where the podcast is. It's where you can sign up for all sorts of cool resources that we've created. One of the coolest resources we're doing right now is in February, we're launching a thing called the Work Smarter Summit. It's a collection of really, really cool experts on how to work more creatively, but also how to lead smarter, how to be more productive, how to collaborate better in teams. Actually, we even have you as a guest. So,
I didn't want to say anything.
It's a pretty good roster.
The best quality people.
Yeah. It's a pretty good roster of quality people. And it's designed, again, just to be a resource to folks to help them lead smarter, but also to help them create smarter and help them collaborate better. So all of that you can find out about at davidburkus.com.
Perfect. We'll have all the links to all of the resources you mentioned down in the description again. But David, I'd just like to say thank you again for coming on the podcast today.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Cheers then.
Today's episode was made possible by members of our premium Deep Creativity Training Program. For less than the price of half a candy bar per day, you too can get world-exclusive daily exercises which push your creativity past its comfort barrier to make you better able to generate ideas in all aspects of your life and work. Invest in yourself now by going to www.ideatovalue.com/deepcreativity and using coupon code PODCAST for 25% off your first order. And don't forget that if you found this episode interesting, to like and share it, and to leave us a review in your favorite podcast player. See you again in the next episode.